Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. I might have to be a little quiet on this intro. Naomi is in the other room recording a podcast, and I do not want to scream loudly or even just talk excitedly with energy and end up in the background of her podcast. But I'm going to be excited because today's episode is Tim McIlrath. And if you don't know who Tim is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Originally from Indianapolis, Indiana, musician Tim McIlrath of Rise Against grew up about an hour outside of Chicago in the suburbs, where he started playing in punk bands. In 1999, Joe Principe and Dan Weeklinski, sorry Joe and Dan, I probably destroyed your last names. Joe and Dan formed Rise Against out of the breakup of their former band 88 Fingers Louie and invited Tim to join. Though the early days were tumultuous, they persevered and released the Transistor Revolt EP a year later. And since those early days, the band has risen to international acclaim, releasing albums on Fat Records, Geffen, DGC, Interscope, and their most current album, the Nowhere Generation 2 EP, was just released on Loma Vista in June. Check it out. Is that too loud? Only one way to know. Listen to Naomi's episode of The Antidote with Amy Aniobi and Grace Edwards. I believe both former guests on Beginnings. So check out those episodes. But listen to their podcast and see if you hear me yelling in the background towards the beginning. Anyway, Tim's great. This is a very good episode. I think I asked questions that he doesn't get usually. And so I was like, oh yeah, it's interesting. I never thought about that. But I thought we got some good stuff. Growing up in the suburbs, playing punk, getting political early on. So I hope you like this one. If you do, you know what, folks? I've been doing this for 12 years. You can check out all the episodes online. I think on Spotify is where they all are. I don't know why only the last 100 show up on Apple, but check out. Go in the back catalog. I've talked to hundreds of musicians and writers, performers, comedians, artists, and so forth. If you like what you hear and you want to subscribe to the show, you can do that wherever you get your podcast from. I am on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. And I got to tell you, a lot of great episodes coming up. I just talked to Lincoln Michelle, wonderful writer. I loved his book, The Body Scout. If you are into dystopian, cyberpunk kind of sci-fi books, I would check that out if I were you. Also, Katie Davidson, a.k.a. Dear Nora. They are just a wonderful musician. I love their album so much. And we had a great talk recently, so stay tuned for those. But for now, let's talk to Tim. Are you in Chicago right now?
Yes, I'm back in Chicago. I just got back a few days ago from a pretty long European tour, so forgive my jet lagness if I'm a little sleepy.
No, that's my natural state, is to be sleepy. So,
good.
I feel like we're vibing on the same wavelength.
Absolutely.
So my wife and I have been terrified of COVID over the last 3 years. My wife's a stand-up, so she has done not a ton of shows, but I'm kind of curious. Is it how is Europe? Should we move there? I mean, we should. She's black and I'm Jewish, so we should probably move there at some point soon. Anyway, but
I love Europe. It's such a good time. It's such I don't know how to describe it, but there's something about being around cultures that are just hundreds and hundreds of years older than ours is, that they've just kind of figured some things out, you know? And I guess, like, to put it through a political lens, because I can't help do that. I'm the guy from Rise Against. Like, they have a left wing and a right wing, just like we do, right? So everywhere does, you know what I mean? And honestly, I wouldn't even, if I had a magic wand and I could make the right wing disappear, I wouldn't want to do that. I think we should be balanced in some way, shape, or form, right?
Oh no, I would totally Jakarta method them. I would totally. 100%.
I feel your pain. What's interesting about the European right wing is like there are things that the European right wing that makes it very different. Like the European right wing is pro gun control. You know, like the European right wing you would never get elected on the right in Europe by running on a policy that they get rid of universal health care. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like you can't do that there. Like so no matter how far right you are, you believe in universal health care, you believe in things like gun control. And I feel like there's some common sense things like that they have a good grasp on. And so that's why you don't see, you know, because I was there in Europe during this most recent Highland Park shooting, which is only about 3 towns over from the town I'm in right now. You know what I mean? So it was like, holy crap, I'm watching this town that I didn't think anybody had ever heard of, you know, on my hotel CNN International, you know, the only English channel I get in Spain or whatever. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. And then you walk out front into a world of, you know, where things like universal health care and gun control are not debated. They're just not debated there. Or even abortion rights. You know what I mean? Those are things that aren't debated over there, really. They're just part of the system. And so, yeah, I mentioned that just to give you an idea of like the starting point of culture over there. Just seems like a better starting point than here.
Totally. But to be fair, they're probably pro gun control because they're able to do their killing with trains and gas chambers. So they've got other things they could do. But
other methods.
Yeah. But wait, you weren't scared of COVID or anything? That's why I started this, because I was just like, we're terrified. We're traveling for the first time in a long time in a couple weeks, and I'm just like kind of like going out of my head with like fear at this point.
Right. Well, have you had it yet?
Nope.
Okay, you haven't had it yet, and you're traveling in the States, or you're traveling to Europe?
In the States, just back to New York.
Okay. So I've been traveling a lot for the last, I guess, year or so. I made it up until last spring before I got it, actually. And when I got it, it was a mild case, but it's enough of a case where, you know, I shouldn't have been playing a show, and so we canceled a couple of shows. So since then, I feel like a little bit of like that immunity, you know, so it was nice. It was almost nice to get it over with, you know, just like, all right, I'm done now. And I had it, and I want to like walk on tiptoes. And so I don't know. I feel pretty good about it. And I feel pretty good about like the budgeted risk. Are you going to get it when you travel? You absolutely might get it when you travel. You know what I mean?
Why are you saying this to me?
But I think that for the most part, and I'm on a bus with like 14 people, right? So when one person gets a cold, like, you know, we're all sleeping within feet of each other every single night. So we all get it. But most of everybody has had it, and most of those cases were very mild. You know what I mean? Some of them didn't even know that they had it. And so I don't know what to tell you. I think get out there, go have fun. You know what I mean? Like, I think obviously these strains seem like they are less and less potent as they come out. So I don't know. Whatever you're comfortable with.
I'm getting the feeling, though, Tim, that you are not a fear-based man like I am.
That could be. I don't know about you, but like, yeah, I don't let a lot. I have teenage girls, and so nothing scares me on the planet. You know, like that makes you sort of like fearless, I guess.
But were you like that before you had children? Like when you were younger, were you kind of courageous, I guess is the word I was looking for, but maybe not even courageous, but just like not fear-based, not doing the math in your head about it, all the dangers that could befall
right.
you.
I think reckless would be the word I would describe my younger self. Just casually reckless without thinking of consequences. Some of the stuff I cringe at, you know, when I think about it. I think I went from like a casually reckless person to a person that sort of, I fell into the band and then a family, you know, all kind of at the same time. And like neither one was really like my plan. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was like, oh crap, I'm in this band, and I'm not just in this band, but I'm the front man of this band, and all of a sudden these responsibilities are on my shoulders, and like, I had to think about that. And all of a sudden the spotlight is on you too, which had never happened in my life before too. I was like, wait, people people are going to say things about like what I'm wearing. You know what I mean? Like things like that's just a weird thing. I don't know how to do this. And then even having a family was like, oh wait, now there's people relying on me for things, you know? And so all of that was kind of crushing, when it happened. You know what I mean? It was sort of like this responsibility that I never anticipated that I would have. And then it all evened out or balanced out or kind of tapered out a little bit. It sort of was like, okay, like now I can figure out a way where I can balance these responsibilities and still sort of find myself and my identity in all of them. So, but yeah, I don't let a lot of shit scare me. You know, the world's an overwhelmingly scary place, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I think if you were to allow it to just find its way into every pore in your body, you'd never walk outside your house, right?
Yeah, which is what I do most days. But
okay, yeah.
Not really. I mean, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic, but can you give me an example when you say reckless of how you were reckless when you were younger? I just want to kind of get a baseline for what you mean.
Sure. Okay. So I'll tell you this much. When I say reckless, I'll start by, like, usually when someone says they were reckless, they just mean like they partied a lot or whatever, and they were just kind of getting into drugs and drinking. I will say I'm straight edge. I've never been drunk in my life. I've never done drugs in my life. And so but when you do that, when you end up being straight edge, and I was kind of straight edge before I even knew what straight edge was. I was just the guy in your friend group that didn't drink. You know what I mean? That's all I was. And then eventually I realized like what straight edge was, which I thought was kind of silly at first. I was like, why should there be a thing about this? And then as you grow up in culture, you realize culture looks at you different when you don't drink. You know, they kind of look at you as an outsider. And then you realize why something like straight edge started in the first place. Yeah, yeah, that wasn't apparent to me as a young person, why there would be a need for something like straight edge to, you know, kind of manifest itself. And then as you get older, you realize, oh, this is why somebody kind of put a name on this thing, because they wanted to like be able to identify with a choice they're making, you know, and then not take shit for it, you know, and be like, hey, this is me. And so let's just deal with it, you know? Anyway, so my reckless adolescence had nothing to do with drinking and drugs. And what I tell people who did spend their adolescence doing that stuff, which, you know, God bless them, is that when you remove those things from your adolescence, there's all of a sudden a lot of time in your adolescence and a lot of boredom that needs to be satisfied. Mm-hmm. And if you're still somebody with like reckless and mischievous tendencies, you fill that boredom with mischief and recklessness. Sometimes to the point where you would have been better off just getting drunk in your friend's parents' basement, you know? And so well,
that's always been my theory about the suburbs, is that like the cops want, like all my friends, like I'm functionally straight edge in the sense that like I don't like the taste of alcohol. I've never done drugs and I don't smoke. So I don't X up, but like I'm functionally like that. I was always kind of like, I'm just like, I mean, I've been drunk before, but it's not my thing. So it's not. But like when I was a kid, it seemed like my friends and I who were like running around, this is why I was like, I'm curious about what you really mean by reckless, because like my friends and I were like just running around, goofing around outside, making jokes, having fun. We kind of got like, we never got harassed, but the cops would like want us to just go somewhere else. And like my friends who like skateboarded definitely got harassed by the cops.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, they would rather have people just sitting in their basement, getting high, stealing their parents' alcohol than like having fun outside.
Yes, you said it perfectly. And that's something that happens to people like you or me, where you're out skateboarding, you know, you're probably dressed in black, like because you got into punk and hardcore. You stand out from the other pedestrians on the street. You're young. You probably don't have a car yet. This is how you're getting around. So you're very visible. And like we got harassed by the cops. And meanwhile, we're just like, wait, like you just said, like you're trying to force us into our friends' parents' basement to just get wasted every night. Like, cause that's what they would prefer. Cause they don't have to deal with you. Neighbors don't deal with you. They don't have to get a call about you skateboarding, like not landing kickflips all night, you know, in a parking garage somewhere. And so that felt very unfair to me at the time. We all hung out at a park, in like the mid 90s, and it became this sort of like communal meeting place. You know, when you left your house, you didn't know where anybody was. You went to the park, you probably found somebody, and eventually people ended up there. You know, everyone has that in whatever neighborhood they grew up in, I'm sure. And the cops would kind of troll that park. And then when the cops were done trolling that park, giving us shit for skateboarding or being out past curfew or whatever, then like the jocks might roll in because they were bored too. And they wanted to go harass some long-haired kids and call them faggots. You know what I mean? And so it's like, you felt like you were getting all like, wait, the cops are harassing us and these jocks are harassing us. And then sometimes just like these gangbangers would come in just because they knew we were an easy target, you know? And you just felt like you were really getting kind of picked on. And you did one of two things. Like you either got really angry, you know what I mean? And it turned you into like a bit of a chip on your shoulder, you know? Or maybe you just joined the enemy. You're like, screw this. I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to skateboard anymore. I want to go somewhere else, you know?
Oh.
So, I mean, I didn't see a lot of that happening, but I'm just saying like that kind of harassment, like it affects you at a young age. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, I think it's where like, you know, you start to experience, you know, the little bits of bias that like, for me, like a straight white kid who grew up in Chicago might experience. So you get a little tip of the iceberg, like, oh, this is what getting harassed looks like or getting treated differently looks like. And this is just for like skateboarding and listening to punk. What could this possibly be like for someone who can't change the color of their skin or can't change their sexuality or things like that? Like it must be impossible or aren't existing in this cush little Pleasantville of a suburb outside of Chicago. Like this must be awful. And so it's sort of like, for me, a lot of light bulbs went off. Like,
right.
Like, oh, right. Like I live a relatively, sheltered life here and I get little bits of what it's like to exist in the outside, in the margin and like outside of somebody's preferred circle. But I can't even imagine what it would be like to walk in the shoes of somebody who really is being treated differently by the institutions of America. You know, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it is interesting how a lot of these, like, I mean, for sure, obviously, maybe not obviously, but like being Jewish in America, and I grew up in a very Christian area, it was like this early kind of like radicalizing thing. Not really, but just like enough to push me aside. But it was definitely like Black Flag and Minor Threat and Sonic Youth that like started to like really kind of every metaphor is so dumb that I'm thinking of right now, but that I was going to say open my eyes, but like, it was really like reading like Get in the Van, where I'm just like, oh shit. Yeah. Like every fucking show they're playing, they're getting harassed by skinheads and cops. Like, like okay. So, you know, all the things they're talking about, I'm not experiencing, but I'm kind of seeing like in the news or something like that. And I'm starting to like become aware of the world. That's better. Aware of like how the world actually works.
Totally. It's so true. Yeah. And Black Flag and like bands, books like that, Get in the Van, because they were the guys who like paved that trail of like touring back in the day. So they were doing it before anybody was doing it. And when those dudes rolled out of a van, you know what I mean? They were a sight to behold, and they got harassed in middle America. You know what I mean? And even in their own, like you said, even in their own scene, like Black Flag became this sort of, they were kind of like, it was like a King of the Hill game where it's like they were on the top and you couldn't be a punk unless you took them down. You had to, unless you punched Henry Rollins when he rolled through Chicago, like you weren't a punk. And we've done records with Bill Stevenson, and I've met, you know, all like those guys, and they tell just incredible stories, and they really were on the front lines of it all. And it was exhausting for them because they just wanted to play music, and their music was admittedly confrontational, but like it was not, they were like, when I go on stage, I'm worried about like whether my guitar is in tune. You know what I mean? They were worried about whether they were right. They were worried about whether the guy the shirtless dude in the front row was going to literally just sucker punch him, you know, and then prove to his friends, I sucker punched Des Cadena. Like I'm more badass than you. So yeah, I forgot where I was going with that, but I feel it. Yeah. You know, you sort of, you start, you know, for me, it was like growing up in the suburbs. It was just like a northwest suburbs of Chicago, kind of like a predominantly white Pleasantville middle class area. And all was, you know, I had a uneventful childhood. You know what I mean? It was like a Norman Rockwell all American childhood. And then the second I made some different choices about what I was interested in, you know, skateboarding, punk, hardcore, quit sports, pick up guitar, drive into the city to go see shows, that kind of thing. I noticed that my Pleasantville, my little world, looked at me differently. It kind of side-eyed me and treated me differently because of my choices. And that was my first clue in where it's like, oh, this Pleasantville exists because I've always kind of done what you approve of. And I've always been walking down the same road that you walk down. But your approval of me hinges on me continuing to walk down that road. And the second I deviate from it, your approval goes away. And all of a sudden, I'm more of a threat. And I'm more of someone to look down on. And then someone to kind of like harass. And the interesting thing about that too is that I actually still live in the same town that I grew up in. And what's interesting about that is that, so I go down that road and I'm kind of looked down upon by my peers or adults around me. And the only time like they came back around was when the band got successful. And then it was like, oh, what you're doing is cool. You know what I mean? Like pat you on the back. And it's like, wait, I don't want that pat on the back because I know that it's only happening because you heard my song on the radio and you told your friend you knew me. You know what I mean? Or that kind of thing. Like, but you didn't approve of me deviating from that road in the first place, you know? So it's sort of a mixed bag of emotions, like when the band snowballed into like what it was. And it was like, oh, Tim's a musician and his band's on the radio and that kind of thing. But it's like, yeah, but it was a long road to get there. And you weren't necessarily like the person that was egging me on, you know?
Right. And what they are interested in is the fame aspect, not the creative aspect or the aesthetic aspect. They're like, oh, yeah, you know, you're on the radio, or like I've seen your albums at the record store.
Right.
Not that there is any kind of inherent love of the kind of music you make or of anything else, right?
Right. Exactly.
Can we go back a little bit? Because I'm curious, like, I'm curious in the predecessors that allowed you to start making those choices that led you away from this kind of like Pleasantville life. And I'm wondering like first of all, what primed you? And then how did you start making those choices? Like what was there in your early life where you like thought maybe like you would start, or where like when you look back, you're like, oh, right, I see that as being something that would allow me to think just slightly differently enough that I'll start making these choices. Like I said, like I think being Jewish in a Christian area was just enough of a little wedge that it like gave me gave me space to start making different choices from everyone else.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Yeah. So what's my origin story? That's a good question. Like why did I identify with more extreme music as opposed to what was on like mainstream radio? I grew up in a Irish Catholic family, went to Catholic school, so like uniforms, you know, that kind of thing up until about 8th grade. And by the time I was in like junior high, that's when one of my best friend's older sister, and she was older than us, so she was at an all-girls school, like also Catholic, I think. But she was discovering like alternative music. She was discovering like college radio and that kind of thing. And I remember she was way into like bands like Jesus and Mary Chain and like My Bloody Valentine. But when she came across heavier stuff like Black Flag or Minor Threat, she'd pass it on to her little brother, who was my best friend. And it'd be like, oh, this isn't my thing, but it might be your thing. And then he'd come to school with like, holy crap, have you heard this band? Have you heard this band? And we're like, no. Like, all I'm hearing is Paula Abdul and, you know, MC Hammer and, you know, whatever else was big in like the late 80s and 90s on the radio. And, you know, Metallica was starting to get big and there was some metal stuff happening and there were some metalheads in my school and that was cool. But this really underground stuff, kind of pre-Nirvana, you know, like underground stuff was really blowing my mind. And so to answer your question, like, why was it blowing my mind? I don't really know. I guess I didn't really identify with a lot of the mainstream stuff. I got really excited about this sort of underground culture that was existing that people, at least in my world, didn't really know about. It felt like this cool secret tribe, you know? And then the music seemed dangerous. You know what I mean? Like, I've only heard the speakers of my little boombox play, Motley Crue and like the Guns N' Roses and the hair metal that my sisters were listening to. I had two older sisters. I had never heard it play Minor Threat. You know what I mean? Like hearing literally hearing the riff to Filler come out of this boombox that was only really playing like Vanilla Ice was like, oh my gosh, how does my boombox even make this sound? This is crazy. And it sounded so dangerous and cool. And I just immediately was hooked and I needed to know way more about it. And this is a pre-internet world. So it was like this quest now to like find out more about what's happening here.
You said before, use the word reckless. You just used the word dangerous now. Do you know if there was something you were like, what was it about like something that was dangerous or reckless that was appealing to you? Like what did you see in your life where you're like, I don't know if I like this exactly. Right. And maybe as a kid, I certainly didn't. I didn't articulate it, but maybe you didn't articulate it. But like, can you think back? Like, what was it about that stuff that like contrasted with your life that made it appealing?
I think it must have dovetailed with my interest in reading and literature. And I was kind of like probably like a sci-fi geek, at the time too. And so I would find my way into books like 1984 by George Orwell or Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, or Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury.
Yeah, for sure.
Or even like Slaughterhouse 5, like Kurt Vonnegut, stuff like that. And I didn't find my way into those because I was looking for, I didn't know I was reading a dystopian novel. I didn't know what a dystopian novel was. I was just like, oh, cool, future world, like where firefighters burn books, you know what I mean? Like I'm just interested in this. And so I'm reading this stuff and it's just like germinating in my head, and then I'm listening to this music that's all like, Black Flag singing about, I see my place in American waste. You know what I mean? Courthouse, jails, and factories. The world's got some plans for me. And then I'm also, tying that into all this Orwell that's in my head and like Bradbury that's in my head. And I'm thinking, and then at some point those things started to like come together and click and like, oh, right. Mm-hmm. Like we are insiders until we deviate from the plan. And then we are outsiders. And then the world treats us differently. And I guess I've always had a penchant to root for the underdog. You know what I mean? And, I grew up in Chicago as a White Sox fan. We were always the underdogs, And
okay. So interesting.
Yeah. And so I think that wanting to stick up for the underdog, you know what I mean? Like I think was something that was, deep inside of me. I was never comfortable with like the kid next to me getting picked on in class, by kids who I thought were my friends, you know what I mean? And so I think all those things kind of like started to just kind of form this really potent mixture that made me find punk and hardcore.
Yeah, I think that's actually really like just being a White Sox fan in the 80s or whatever, right?
Right.
Just like
yeah,
wanting to root for the underdog, especially in America where we are very much crushed by these systems of domination. Yeah. And you have your choice. I think you said this earlier, right? You have your choice. You can be part of the people who are fighting that, or you can get sick of being part of the people who fight that and join the other side, right?
Right.
And it's just like, I don't know. I don't like these systems dominate. I don't like just being cruel to someone just for the heck of it, or I don't find any fun in it or anything like that. I could have turned out different, maybe. I don't know. I don't know if it's if there's some kind of like neuron in my brain that makes me want to help people. I don't know if it's just like biological empathy or whatever it is, but there is that kind of just seed in me, right?
Yeah.
And I see, I see a lot of like similarities. Like when I was reading about you last night, and I was just like, oh, okay. Like we read a lot of the same books. You're just like slightly older than me, and like we read a lot of the same books, and we got into the same kind of music at the same time, roughly, and just how like I'm like I. That's why I kept like pushing at this analogy between us, because I'm like, all right, so what is this seed? And it is like, wanting the underdog as opposed to like wanting to be like the the brutal person on top hurting everyone else. Mm-hmm. It is that underdog thing that I think kind of like just gives you just a little bit of space.
Yeah.
To take in Kurt Vonnegut, to take in, Ian Mackay.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And then I feel like for me, like I felt like I also recognized a little bit of my position of privilege. You know what I mean? And like that, I feel like an underdog, but I must acknowledge that it's a perspective thing. There are people that are far more underdog than I am. But then I always thought like, but if I'm in a position to help somebody or stick up for somebody, you know what I mean? Or use this like to like be a voice for somebody who doesn't have one, like then I should do that, Like I think about like, I think about even like the band and how we started and everything that we did as a band or everything we've done as a band. And I think about through the lens of like a white male in America being the guy from Rise Against, right? Mm-hmm. I do this. And then I think about, one of my best friends that I grew up with in high school still to this day is Indian, right? And I was thinking the world will accept me walking out on stage to a 30-foot upside down American flag and singing about, you know what I mean? Because I've done that. I do that. You know what I mean? And it might ruffle some feathers. I mean, it will, but for the most part, I'll get away with it. You know what I mean? Like I'll be able to do it and I will make a political statement and I will talk about this country. And then I think about, would my best friend get away with it? Would somebody who's non-white walk out there and get away with this the same way I get away with it? Like, isn't that a little position of privilege that I get away with it? That I can just go out there and just do this? Like, or would he be far more harassed than I am? And so that's privilege, right? That I have an ability to get in there and talk about these things in a way that I don't think everybody is allowed to do, And so that's something that I always think about with this band. Like if you have a position, use it.
Yeah. I mean, to speak to that directly, it's, I think Rage Against the Machine, when they did have upside down American flags for their SNL performance, they were right before they started, they were taken down. And then I believe they were not allowed to play their second song, if I remember correctly.
Absolutely. That's why Rage was always great, because they didn't care about the spotlight. They were always, and they always saw it as an opportunity actually to do something more. I just saw Rage, by the way, on Saturday night.
Awesome.
Their first show back in 11 years, which was pretty incredible, I must say.
It's always funny to me, like the conservative bros that go to see Rage and then are flabbergasted. They're like, wait, why are they're saying like leftist stuff? What's going on here? I thought there was just like they're always online afterwards, like confused over what they just saw.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the phenomenon. Even like the first time I saw Rage was probably like 96 at the Aragon Ballroom in Chicago. And I was right there in the pit, just getting my ass handed to me and looking around and just being like, wait, these are the guys that try to beat me up in high school. You know what I mean? Which was informative as our band started, you know what I mean? And we played for a larger swath of, fans and realized like, okay, like, some people out here are not listening to your lyrics at all, or don't care about them, or know them and just disagree with you, but are just here to kind of like rock out, And I always think about Rage, I mean? It didn't slow them down. They just kind of did their thing. But yes, that sort of inexplicable shock of somebody like not thinking that Rage Against the Machine aren't exactly what they want them to be, and they aren't just pure entertainment. Like that's like, wait, you've totally missed the point here. Like they are not beholden to you, my friend.
So, okay. I'm curious then, in your early life, right? Maybe it's religion, maybe it's your parents. Are you getting any kind of ethical information that kind of pries you apart, that like makes you root for the underdog? Like, you said Irish Catholic, you went to Catholic school. I know that there's lots of bad things in religion, but are there, like, did you get anything good out of having like a Catholic upbringing or going to a Catholic school?
I think it made me a better writer. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like no matter how anyone feels about the Bible, it's this incredible piece of literature. You know what I mean? Like the descriptive parts of it, like the stories, everything in it. I feel like we studied the heck out of it, studied the hell out of it. And, it's something that comes back to me once in a while when I am writing. I didn't think I'd be a writer. I didn't think I would even when I loved Minor Threat and Black Flag, I never thought about the writing, feature of being in a band like that. I just thought, this is cool. We'll play loud guitar riffs and we'll just scream into a microphone. It's yeah, but they also wrote, Ian MacKaye was writing something that was important to him. And if he didn't write it well, nobody was really going to listen to it. It was going to be campy or not make sense or whatever, it had to be good, So we think of Ian MacKaye as this badass shaved head, front man, going crazy on stage. But we need to also think about him as this really excellent writer. Those are poems. You know what I mean? In My Eyes is a poem, Filler is a poem. And so is, any Black Flag song or Descendants song or, all these bands that we all grew up on. The writing is important. And I feel like I didn't think of myself as a writer ever. But when the band was created, I realized I need to write, right? Because I have to write these songs. And then I think all of the literature, anything from Slaughterhouse-Five to the Bible, you know what I mean? All came in handy. Mm-hmm. And when I started literally just writing lines, writing bars, as the kids say, and just putting it all together, I pulled from all those things. And I was at that moment grateful for all the input that I put into my head over the years.
What about your parents? Did you learn things from them ethically? How did they conduct their lives? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, my parents were non-musical and non-political and just good people, just that's what they were. We didn't talk politics in the house. Not that we avoided it, but I didn't know the difference between a Democrat and a Republican, all through probably high school even, mm-hmm. It wasn't something that I thought about, and it wasn't, I think we didn't live in this polarized as a world as we live in today with so much information, access to information, news, that kind of thing. The news was something that happened for maybe 30 minutes a day on TV.
Right.
And you watched half of it, and 10 of those minutes were commercials, and so, yeah, non-political, non-musical, just good people raising 4 kids, middle class suburb of Chicago,
Uh-huh. Yeah. What did they do for a living?
My mom was a special ed school teacher. So she taught kids with learning disabilities and that kind of thing in the town. And then my dad worked for a big healthcare company where he was a salesman. And so he was he was pretty much, I think the product he was selling for most of my childhood was just software. So he would go to your hospital and be this is the program you should buy from our company, and this will help you, do patients and all stuff. So he was flying, he traveled a lot. He wasn't around a whole heck of a lot. He flew around, the Midwest, just selling medical software to people until he got sick of the corporate world and then wanted his own store. And so he bought a UPS store in the town, ran that for 10 years and then retired. But at that point I was already at college and gone when he was doing that. I think he just kind of got sick of working for the man and wanted to do something himself and run his own store. And so, he did that. Yeah. But pretty idyllic. I have two amazing older sisters. I have one little brother. And we lived a pretty Norman Rockwell Americana kind of life. You know what I mean? I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah. So were they kind of exhausted by the time you came along? You already had 2 siblings. And so
if they weren't exhausted, I exhausted them. I definitely, I look back now and I realize how good I had it. But at the time I remember thinking why can't I play guitar super loud at midnight? You're oppressing me. You know what I mean? Yeah. I was that kid.
Yeah, no, I get that. What made you like that? I'm kind of curious because I was similar. Maybe not. I wanted to play my guitar at midnight, but just like
Right.
I did not like having people tell me what to do.
Yeah, I was definitely the same way. I don't know. I guess I hadn't always had an issue with authority, like every good punk hardcore kid should have. And I don't know. I was so interested in like just the whole punk and hardcore subculture and going to shows and skateboarding and grabbing the flyer to find the next show and spending your money on records and, you know, taping college radio shows that we were getting from Chicago, you know, on cassette tapes. I was so into that. And that was like, that to me, that world was so much cooler and no one knew about it. And like anybody who critiqued it, like my elbows were up, you know, it was like, no, this stuff is really cool. And my parents they're largely permissive of like most of it. Like my bands, when I started high school, we practiced in my parents' basement and like made it happen. And I say my parents, probably my mom mostly, because she was the one that was home, you know, and so she was the one that like let it happen. And I think that my two older sisters were pretty perfect kids, you know, straight A's, you know, all that stuff, you know, and went to a Big Ten college and all that stuff. So when I came along, it was a little different. People I brought back home were a little different. So my mom was initially kind of fearful of like what's going on. She assumed that I was just on drugs and that all my friends were druggies. And then I think she just realized, she met all my friends, you know what I mean? She was like, oh, these are really nice people. Like, and they're good people.
Right.
And like, and they became like, I don't know, she fell in love with them. They fell in love with her. And my parents inadvertently gave me this place, like, to let our music ambitions kind of thrive, to let us hang out in, you know, like they let us just do a lot of stuff. We got away with a lot of stuff, you know, and I think that was just, my parents were just kind of good people and they were along for the ride and let me do it. And honestly, I look back and I can't believe they let us do some of the stuff that we did. Like sometimes we had shows in their basement on a Friday night where you know what I mean? Like we would just, like, unbeknownst to them, we were flyering at like 3 different high schools. And so of course people showed up, you know, like hundreds of people, you know, and it's like cops get called, all this stuff. And it's funny, I think now too, because I am a parent, I have, you know, 2 teenage girls, and there are just things I would never let them do. You know what I mean? Like, you're not having a show in our basement. You know what I mean? Like, we're not doing this, you know? And I think about the stuff they let me get away with and how important it was. And I also think about, like, how they also maintained a certain distance from it in a great way that I had to do it on my own. They were, when I say permissive, I don't necessarily mean like super supportive, because they weren't like, you should go do this or I'll help you pay for it, you know, whatever. They just kind of let it happen. But they never came in and was like, hey, my friend's got a recording studio downtown and I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to buy all your friends new guitars. I'm going to support you in all you do. I'm going to buy you guys a van. I'm going to do all this stuff. They didn't like meddle with it. You know what I mean? Not that they were in a position to meddle with it anyway. But I think about like, my girls are actually not into like music. They don't want to start a band or anything like that. But if they ever were, I would have to, every bone in my body would want to just buy them the coolest guitar and like send them to Bill Stevens to the blasting room and like, you know, make it all happen for them. You know what I mean? But I realized I would be ruining it for them. You know, I would just be wrecking it. It's like, oh, that girl's dad just bought her all that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, you wouldn't want to meddle with it. And so in a way, like my upbringing of music was perfect because my parents they were permissive enough, but they didn't meddle with it. They just let it happen. And so that gave us a lot of obstacles that we had to kind of figure out. We didn't have the right gear. We didn't have enough money for it. You know, we didn't have a rehearsal space. We couldn't afford recording time. You know, we didn't have any connections to like promoters in the city to get us shows. We had zero connections. I was literally writing letters to people saying, please listen to this, you know, and that all made it so much better. And, you know, it was hard at the time, but it made it so much better to kind of, just kind of walk up those hills on your own with nobody's help.
Were your parents that permissive with your older sisters? Or do you think it was just that like, well, your dad's traveling all the time, you know, you've already been through it. They've already been through it twice with 2 other kids and they turned out fine. They're like, this will be okay.
Yeah. I think, they were permissive with my sisters. My sisters, I don't think really challenged them as much as I did, you know what I mean? And so I think that it was, not that it was a total walk in the park, but I think they were kind of like, probably figured, oh, and this is the way it'll be for Tim too. Like we went through high school pretty uneventfully with these two girls, and they're off to school, and all this stuff. And Tim will be a similar thing. And so then when I wasn't a similar thing, it was all a little alarming. And alarming to my sisters too, who were away at college at that point and saying, Mom, Dad, there's 100 kids in your basement. Like, what is going on here? Like, someone needs to stop this. Like, this is crazy, and so there was a lot of that, but in the end, it was a lot of trust. Nobody ripped me out of that nest and threw me into boarding school. I think they kind of just trusted me a little bit. And I think in like deep down, like my dad was kind of excited to watch it all happen and thought it was cool. Like, oh, you guys got in a van and drove to Milwaukee and played a show somewhere. Like, that's crazy. I didn't see that coming, but I think he was nervous and not sure about it, not sure where it would go. But I think deep down he was kind of like, oh, I spent my high school years mostly working in a factory after school to pay for college, but Tim spending it with his friends, skateboarding and playing music and actually meeting people and getting different cities. So I think part of him was kind of excited that I was doing that, and then B, like that he was able to provide that for me. You know what I mean? Like his hard work meant that I didn't spend my days after school working in a factory, like so I could pay for college. Like it meant I had a few luxuries, like in my life. One of them was time, to just screw around, and skateboard and play music and direct all my energy and effort to like buying that Gibson SG and, like packing up your stuff and playing the nights at Columbus Hall and like rehearsing songs and just writing songs and doing all this stuff and adding more people into that process, and that's what we did. And that was such an awesome time of life.
Okay. So there's a little bit of like living vicariously through you, a little bit of pride in giving you the foundation to be able to do this in the first place. And then another thing I was curious about is like, do you think being straight edge also gave your parents a little bit of like, well, he's not getting into drugs, he's not drinking, so this is a good activity for him?
I think that helped for sure. And that straight edge was a bit of like armor against the world in that way, because when the world sees you, and I had hair down on my shoulders, you know what I mean? I remember I wanted to have cool long hair, kind of like Kurt Cobain had cool long hair. Right. But mine came out more like Sideshow Bob had hair, Yeah. So I had this massive hair. So I was a sight just walking down the street. And I'm wearing, it's the 90s. I got big skate jeans on. And, I got my big ass hoodie, which is funny because that's all back in style anyway now. So it's like I'm not looking that different than the kids these days. And it was just like, I think that like they were like you were saying, was it a bit of vicariousness or whatever? It was more like, I don't know. I was doing something different. And so I was existing in like on a different plane in the same world that they were all kind of, what we were all existing in, but I was going through it in a different way.
Mm-hmm. I guess what I was trying to get at is like, they could have clamped down on this and said, no, this is not happening. And then that would have been the end of it. Right.
Yeah. But that's what I was trying to say. So like, I looked like a druggie, you know what I mean? Like I looked like a kid who was just partying, you know what I mean? Like all the time, and that's an adult or a teacher's most potent critique they can level at you when they see you. That kid, oh, he's a druggie. That kid, oh, like they're just partying all the time. And so when you tell somebody like that who's already just looking at you and they're just, you're visibly making them mad. When you tell them, I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I don't even smoke cigarettes, man. It's so disarming. It disarms them from their most potent critique of you. And it also confuses the shit out of them. Because they're just like, wait, you're dressed like that and it's not because you do drugs, you know what I mean? Or not that you're trying not to signal to other drug users that you're a drug user and that's what you want to do. Or you don't party, you don't even drink at all. Like, even my perfect straight A kid on the tennis team drinks. You know what I mean? Like, you're saying you don't drink. It confuses them and it almost makes you like seem a little more dangerous. Like, wait, what is this kid into? If like he's not doing this, if his friends aren't doing this. Not that all my friends are straight edge, but like, I loved that moment of like disarming that adult. You know what I mean? It just to watch like their hard drive just crash behind their eyes. Like, wait,
right.
I thought I had you pegged in all my experience of being a teacher and adult that I've pegged you as this. And now you're saying this is not this. And now I'm going back to the drawing board and being, what the hell is up with this kid? You know? So I think it helped that my parents, when I figured out like I never had a party at my house. You know what I mean? There was never drinking and drugs at my house. It sort of never happened. It happened in my friend group, but they knew it wasn't going to happen under my roof. You know what I mean? Like they had to go somewhere else for it, you know? And I think that probably helped, you know? And we were doing plenty of other mischief that would have got us in a lot of trouble, but it wasn't drinking and drugs.
Oh yeah. I want to go back to that for a second.
Yeah.
When like reckless mischief, what do you mean by that? Like, is there a specific example you have? Because I was still curious about like what that actually meant.
I guess we were just sort of vandals. You know what I mean? Like we were pranksters and vandals. And so we were the guys that would drive around your town and somebody was throwing away all their furniture. And so we would take that furniture and set it up in the middle of an intersection.
Sure.
You know,
okay.
Like a couch and an end table and a coffee table with the lamps, you know, or you were throwing away like some big porcelain kitchen sink or toilet. So we're going to take it and launch off of the fourth story of the parking garage and watch it shatter into a million pieces. Or your big screen TV, which back then were huge, heavy tube TVs.
Right.
We were taking that to the parking garage and we were launching it off, you know, and just doing it to watch it explode. We were lighting off fireworks, you know, by the police station. We eventually would get into like making pipe bombs and stuff like that, you know, which I always try to tell people, like, this was a pre 9/11 world.
Sure.
Pipe bombs were still very just fun in Norman Rockwell Americana. You know what I mean? Like,
it's still a post-weather underground world though. So
it's very true. We just wanted a bigger firework until we saw it. And so we started blowing off those around town and stuff like that. And that got a little dicey because that definitely like triggered the authorities to figure out, wait, we found scraps of a pipe bomb somewhere. Like, and now they're kind of looking for us, you know? So that era, I'm excited that I still have my fingers and I'm excited that it happened in a pre 9/11 world. So I didn't end up on a terror list that didn't exist.
Sure.
I'm excited that we never got caught for it. Nobody got hurt. This was stuff we were just trying to, you know, blow up a tree, not like blow up a cop car or something, you know, like that's all we were doing.
No, I know exactly. This is all very familiar. Minus the pipe bomb. It was,
right.
But you know, like quarter sticks, like that kind of stuff was the most. And I did not want to lose any fingers. So I'm like, you guys can light that. I'll stand away from this. Or like, you know, I guess the most we ever did was, outside of quarter sticks, was, putting dry ice in a 20-ounce bottle or a 2-liter bottle and then closing it up and then throwing it and letting it explode somewhere.
We absolutely did that stuff too.
Yeah.
We were way into it. We were buying model rocket engines and grinding that into powder to use for like the bombs and stuff like that.
Yes.
It's like, and I say this all and like, I cringe when I picture us in a basement making these things. And I know now all the ways that can go wrong. You know what I mean? And like, you didn't know. There was no internet before. It wasn't like, here's how you do it.
That was the age of the Anarchist Handbook. You could download the Anarchist Handbook off of a BBS, a bulletin board system. Maybe you knew someone on AOL that could give it to you. And also phone phreaking was the other thing. I never did any of it, but I was just fascinated by how you could like somehow tap into the phone system.
Totally, yeah, all that stuff. We would smoke bomb the hallways in high school, which would shut school down for the day.
Okay, so real mischief. Okay.
Yeah, I guess it was like vandalism type stuff. I mean, in the era when paintball guns came out, we were like, let's go have fun. You know what I mean? Like, we were taking down street signs and, you know, just kind of wreaking it. Mailbox baseball, like wreaking havoc around, because, you know, like, this is what we're sober. You know what I mean? We're just sober and we're kids and we didn't have girlfriends. You know what I mean? Like, we were just like, let's go just wreak havoc on places. And that's what we did. And it was, you know, it was reckless and dumb. Nobody got hurt. You know what I mean? I'm sure somebody was bummed when they woke up and their mailbox was gone, you know, but, yeah. So whenever something happens like that, cause it's funny, cause I live in the burbs now, whenever something happens, like to my house or whatever, I'm always like, well, I can't be mad about that. Yeah, that egg on my window, Yeah, I had that coming.
It's karma. It's the penance for my childhood.
Totally, yeah.
We're right at the end of the show, and there's still something I'm a little curious about.
Okay.
You know, we talked a little bit about how like maybe like rooting for the underdog was maybe like a little wedge, but I'm also kind of curious, like what primed you to kind of be a little dissatisfied in suburbia in the first place, right? You could have just done what other people did, right?
Right.
But there was something I know for myself, there was always something where just like this felt off. It didn't feel right.
Yeah.
It felt a little like, oh, I don't like that everyone is just following a script where like you see someone with like long hair and a hoodie and you're like, oh, that guy's like a druggie or something like that. It just didn't feel right to me. And I never could articulate it. And I'm just wondering if maybe like you could see that. And I think maybe for myself, it was just that like I was more emotional than my parents and my sister. Or like, no, my sister was kind of like the same as me. But like I was more emotional than my parents. And I wonder if that was just enough to like kind of give me a little space. I don't know if you thought about that for yourself.
Yeah, I've honestly not done a lot of self-reflecting on this, but it's probably a good thing to try to figure out. I'd say but like you said, I relate to that something's a little off sentiment. Like I relate to that, you know? In the same way that I wasn't relating to like, you know, I would say like the super popular kids or the jocks or the kids that were really tracking to like go to school and like get good grades and all that stuff. That stuff didn't seem really that important to me. I didn't like the outcome. That was going to be on the other end of that. And so then what? Then I'm a suit and tie, 9 to 5, this world. Like, that's what I'm going for. That's what I'm working my ass off to get. Like, that didn't motivate me, you know? And then music came along. And then I would say, because mid-90s, especially in hardcore, it was pretty hyper-political at the time. There were a lot of shows you would go to that were talking about, say, like indigenous rights, that kind of thing. So like somebody would come through and talk about the indigenous people of all of these, you know, third world and developing countries and like what America's role is and their oppression or their suppression. And that stuff was like, whoa, I didn't learn anything about that. I want to know more about that. Or I'd go see like a Los Crudos show in like Chicago. And I'm like, oh, I never even heard of this Pilsen neighborhood. But now I'm realizing all the problems that exist in it and all the poverty that exists in this city that's only 15 miles from my house, you know, and how there's two halves of the city and segregation is alive and well in the city of Chicago. It still is to this day. That stuff was like eye-opening, right? It became like this secondary education. And then I got into really metally, moshy, new school hardcore like Earth Crisis and Turmoil and Integrity and Snapcase and Strife. And bands like Earth Crisis were like talking about animal rights, you know, and that all of a sudden really resonated with me. I was a meat and potatoes Chicago kid, you know, hot dogs and McDonald's, you know, whatever. And like this stuff was like, wait, you're telling me that we don't have to eat meat or we just choose to eat it, you know? And then here's what we do to animals and how they suffer to supply us with this. That stuff was like, it was important to me specifically to like, you know, say animal rights or indigenous people rights. But it also, in a bigger picture, it was showing me like there's more to the world than just what I'm learning in school. Like it wasn't just about like animal rights in a way politicized me because I realized like, wait, if I'm being lied to about this or not even being lied to directly, but just not being told about it, you know, then what else am I not being told about? You know, we're not talking about like the indigenous peoples of the world in my school. We're not talking about animal rights in my school. So what else aren't we talking about? And then I wanted to know more. Then I was very much like a pupil at these shows. It's like 90s hardcore, like race trader on stage talking about, you know, like, power and privilege and white privilege, which I'd never heard that term before, you know? And so all of that was like, I need to know more about this. I want to know. So I'm the kid going home with your 7-inch and the PETA pamphlet and the flyer on East Timor in Indonesia. And I'm like, just eating it up. Just like, wait, what is happening? You know, and now the songs mean more to me, you know, like Destroy the Machines by Earth Crisis means more to me, you know, like all of this stuff, like a Los Crudos song, even though I don't speak Spanish, like means more to me. Or Martin's intensity about and telling me those stories of his neighborhood and how he grew up, and that means more to me. And then I was never turning back at that point, right?
Can I throw something at you? Because as you were talking,
Please.
it made me think of something.
Mm-hmm.
You said your dad, he started his own UPS store, right? Because he didn't want to work for the man, right? Did he not like his job? Because I got these signals from my parents, and my mom was also a teacher. Again, a lot of consonants between us. My mom was a teacher before she retired, and I don't think she liked teaching, but I don't think she liked having to deal with the politics of the high school she taught in. And I don't think my dad really liked his job. And I wonder if I started to get signals from that where I was like, they're not they like their lives, and certainly they like their family and their friends and everything. But there's something just following the same path as them maybe isn't right for me. And I'm wondering if you saw anything from your parents or even from older folks in your life where you're like, maybe that's not the way it doesn't seem great.
Yeah. My dad never talked about his job. And so I didn't get the impression that it was that he was passionate about it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That it was something that excited him. He was really good at it. I remember because he would go on the salesman trips, and my parents would get a trip to Barbados or whatever that. And, he was always, I remember seeing his office a couple times, and, he worked for a company called, Baxter, and it was all we have Allstate and Walgreens is all in this corridor around Chicago, these big corporate offices. So he was all in that corridor. They were large employers around the Chicago area at the time. I never got the impression that he liked it or hated it. You know what I mean? I think he was just, happy to be providing for his family. Mm-hmm. My mom was just so selfless. She's just, she worked with learning disability kids and, all that comes with that. And in fact, my sister would go on to work, the same job. She does that now, where she works with learning disabilities and that kind of thing, which we know way more about now than we did about even when my mom was doing it in the 80s and 90s. And so, yeah, I guess to answer your question, I never aspired to do what my dad was doing. You know what I mean? It never seemed like a thing that I should work towards. I also never really aspired to do what my mom was doing either. I think I was just your typical kind of I want to carve my own lane here. I want to do something different here. But I had no idea what that was. Even my sisters, I thought, well, it's good for them, but that's not my world. I don't want to end up at that Big Ten college. I don't want to, do all these things. I want to kind of carve my own lane. And I don't even know if I was conscious of even that sentiment, back in the day. But when I look back, that's what I was doing. I wanted some fresh turf to step on. I didn't want to walk anywhere that's already been walked on.
I see. Did you have any ambition before music for something else?
No, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was in school when the band signed a contract. School was mostly a way to get myself out of the burbs into Chicago and have my parents pay my rent. That's kind of that's what school was. That was the vehicle, what school was. So I didn't take it too seriously, but I will say I got very interested in my sociology classes. I got very interested in my political science classes. That stuff was blowing my mind. You know what I mean? So even though I was in there half awake, just thinking about going to see Cap'n Jazz and the Blue Meanies that night, I couldn't help but wait, what that guy just said is pretty interesting actually, and so when I did get good grades, it's because I really cared about, about what my teacher was talking about and I actually wanted to know more about it. I would eventually go back into school, which I'm actually back in school right now, trying to finish that same degree I started 20 years ago, just because the global pandemic gave me a little extra time to do it. But no, I had no real ambitions. As I was going through school, writing was interesting to me. I was an English major at the time, and I guess I started to think about doing something that in a writing capacity because I really liked writing, and people told me I was getting feedback that's saying hey, you're pretty good at this, or you're at least better at this than most of the other kids. So maybe something in the writing world is something you should consider. And so that's kind of, yeah.
Did you get praised for that when you were younger too? Or is it only as you got older that you started to get praised for writing?
A little bit in high school. And then I remember a couple teachers in college would be they'd write on the back of my paper, wait, I just looked you up. You haven't even declared a major yet. You're flowing through. You're getting like D's in your geology class. You know what I mean? Like, this paper is great. Like, this is really well written. What are you doing? You need to declare a major. It probably should be like creative writing or English. Like, please, this is like, don't ignore this, you know? And I remember thinking like, whoa, I just figured we were all writing the same paper. You know, we were all at the same skills, at the same level, you know? And so when a teacher was like, no, like this is above, you know, the level. So you have a gift and you should think about this. That's when things first started like, all right, maybe I'll consider that. And then the band kind of just started and kind of, you know, went from there, and I had to choose between school and the band. I would have been going into my senior year when we signed a contract with Fat Records. And then that was all she wrote.
Actually seems like a nice place to end then. Thank you for joining me. What a delight to talk.
Oh, yeah. It was my pleasure. Yeah, you definitely make me think about a lot of things that I don't usually think about. So now I'm going to walk away even think about it even more.
Well, you know, I've been in therapy for 9 years now. So every Monday, this is basically how my brain ends up feeling. Wait, what? Is that?
Right. Well, you make a good therapist then.
Well, thank you. Awesome. Well, thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.
All right. See you, man. Yeah, take care.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.